Welcome to the deep dive. So today we are taking on a massive stack of research, and I mean massive. We've got clinical trials, we've got vibrational imaging of human cadaver esophaguses, and believe it or not, the functional morphology of roaring tigers.
Yeah, it's quite the mix of sources today. But it all comes together to solve a very specific, really fascinating biological puzzle. We're figuring out exactly where hyaluronic acid should be injected into human tissue.
Right, so that it actually rejuvenates the skin instead of just, flattening out or slipping, or worse, turning into fat, which is a huge concern if you're looking into these kinds of aesthetic procedures.
Exactly. And the central tension we're unpacking here is really this classic battle between biochemistry and biomechanics.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we're basically trying to satisfy the chemistry of the tissue without failing the physics of gravity and pressure, right?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. On the biochemical side, you have to activate very specific cellular receptors to turn back the clock on the skin. But on the biomechanical side, you have to navigate the physical forces of the human face so the filler actually stays put.
So before we even get into the where of the injection, we kind of have to start with the what, because there's a huge misconception about what hyaluronic acid or HA actually does for you.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of people think all HA is the same. But standard, naturally occurring macromolecular hyaluronic acid does not trigger your cells to regenerate.
It's basically just a humectant, right? Like a sponge.
Right. It's a giant chain of molecules. When it gets injected into the skin, it just sits in the extracellular matrix, holds onto water, and provides deep hydration.
Which is nice. I mean, hydration is good. I like to think of it as throwing a heavy, wet blanket over the tissue. It's definitely hydrated. It might even temporarily puff up, but it's biochemically inert.
Yeah, inert is the key word there. It doesn't possess the capacity to actively communicate with your cells and tell them to build new structural proteins. It's just sitting there.
So if you actually want to change the behavior of the skin at a cellular level, you need to target a specific receptor on the surface of your fibroblasts.
Exactly. And fibroblasts are essentially the cellular factories that build your skin's structure. The specific receptor we are targeting today is called CD44.
CD44. And the heavy blanket of standard HA just physically cannot fit into that CD44 receptor.
No, it's way too big. Now, the human body does have natural enzymes that break down those large HA chains into smaller pieces over time, but for targeted aesthetic medicine, relying on that random breakdown is just way too slow and inefficient.
Which is why scientists realized they had to synthesize and inject highly specific fragments of HA.
Yes, the biological impact is entirely dictated by the length of those fragments. You need specific fragment lengths to actively switch on those CD44 receptors.
And the data on fragment length in our sources is surprisingly narrow. It's like you need fragments between 20 to 38 monomers in length to get any real activation. But the absolute holy grail is exactly 20 monomers. Why is 20 the magic number?
It actually comes down to three-dimensional geometry. A fragment of exactly 20 monomers naturally folds into this highly specific helicoidal or spiral shape.
Oh, wow, so it twists itself.
Yeah, it's built with specific molecular blocks.
Yeah.
You have a block of 6 molecules separated by a spacer of 8 molecules,
Yeah.
followed by another block of 6.
A 6-8-6 arrangement.
Right, and that specific 6-8-6 arrangement forces the molecule to twist into that spiral.
Which fundamentally changes how it interacts with the cell. So instead of just sitting there like a wet blanket, this 20 monomer fragment acts almost like a biological software update. It perfectly plugs into the CD44 port on the fibroblast.
It does. The physical fit is so perfect that the receptor avidity, which is basically the strength of the chemical bond between the fragment and the receptor, it actually triples.
Triples! That's
Yeah.
incredible.
It locks in aggressively. And then it begins sending a sustained, very specific signal into the fibroblast. It doesn't just say, make generic collagen. It specifically triggers the production of type 3 reticular collagen.
And this is a huge distinction for anyone listening who cares about skin aging. Because as we age, our bodies default to making type I fibrotic collagen, which is stiff and rigid.
Exactly. But activating that CD44 switch forces the body to make type 3 instead.
Which is the bouncy, supple, flexible collagen that you really only see in young, healthy skin. So we're actually talking about true tissue regeneration here.
We are. But here's the catch. Sending the software command isn't enough on its own. The fibroblast factory needs raw materials to actually execute that command.
Right, you can have the blueprints, but you still need the bricks.
Exactly. This is why the clinical formulas in the research aren't just pure 20 monomer HA fragments. They're fortified with a specific cocktail of amino acids.
Glycine, proline, and alanine.
Yes. The HA fragment sends the signal to build, and those amino acids provide the physical raw material to construct the new collagen and elastin chains.
Plus, they stabilize the pH of the surrounding tissue, right, making
Yeah.
sure the extracellular matrix is the perfect environment for this whole process.
They do. So, chemically speaking, the problem is perfectly solved. We have the optimal signal and the optimal building materials.
But wait, if these fragments are so powerful, why don't they just work automatically wherever you inject them?
Well, what's fascinating here is that having this perfect formula is completely useless if you don't place it where the CD44 receptors actually live.
Ah, so it's a location problem.
Precisely. Those receptors are not evenly distributed throughout your facial tissue.
They're heavily concentrated in this very specific shallow layer called the lamina propria. And our sources map this out everywhere: the oral cavity, the epidermis, the gastric mucosa.
Right across the board, the lamina propria is a subepithelial layer of loose connective tissue that is just packed with vascular networks, lymphatics, and those CD44-rich fibroblasts.
It's basically a cellular gold mine for skin rejuvenation. But, and here's where it gets really interesting, understanding the physical nature of this layer is where things get super complicated for practitioners.
Because it's a very unique, dynamic type of tissue.
Yeah, and oddly enough, the best visualization we have for this highly elastic, high-stress tissue doesn't even come from human skin in our sources. It comes from the vocal cords of tigers and lions.
Yeah, the researchers looked at the functional morphology of big cat vocal folds to see how they produce those extreme low-frequency vibrations without, completely shredding their throat tissue.
Which is wild, and the structural variation they found in such a microscopic space is just incredible. The fat cells in a tiger's vocal folds are pushed deep down and to the sides, isolating them.
Right, while the lamina propria zone is completely dominated by elastin and interstitial fluid, it allows for massive stretching.
And histologically, they describe the lamina propria as having a literal jelly-like consistency. It's highly compliant, it stretches, and then it snaps back instantly.
And we see that exact same biomechanical profile in the human cadaver studies, too. Specifically, the imaging they did on human esophaguses.
They use something called vibrational optical coherence elastography to measure it. How does that even work to measure jelly?
Think of it like throwing a pebble into a pond and measuring the speed of the ripples to figure out the density of the liquid.
Oh.
They introduce a tiny mechanical wave into the tissue and track how fast it travels with lasers. In stiff tissue, the wave travels super fast. Yeah. But in loose, jelly-like tissue, it travels much slower.
And the numbers they got from the esophagus paint a really tough picture for injections. The lamina propria is incredibly thin, about 158 micrometers thick, and its mechanical stiffness is super low, like 115 kilopascals, or kPa.
Yeah, a stiffness of 115 kPa absolutely confirms that jelly-like structure.
Which sets up our biomechanical nightmare. The lamina propria is the exact spot we need to hit to reach the CD44 receptors. But it's this microscopic, 158 micrometer layer of jelly.
Exactly. So if a practitioner tries to pump a large volume of liquid filler into that space, the tissue simply cannot hold the structural weight.
It'll just warp, right? The fluid will ooze out or visibly distort the surface of the skin. A 115 kPa layer just isn't built to be a storage container for bulk fluids.
It's really not. So the logical pivot for a lot of practitioners is to just go deeper.
Right. Bypass the jelly layer completely. Go down into the sub-mucosa or the deep subcutaneous tissue to find a stronger foundation.
And the elastography data supports that instinct mechanically. Just beneath the lamina propria, the submucosa has a stiffness of about 205 kPa.
So it's nearly twice as firm. It sounds like the perfect structural container. But that assumption brings us to the rat study. They did a 64-week clinical study on rats investigating what happens when you inject a deep subcutaneous bolus of hyaluronic acid.
And just to clarify, a bolus is a single large deposit of the gel.
Right. And the results are basically a massive cautionary tale. They tracked this filler for over a year and a half.
On paper, it looked like a success at first. After 64 weeks, about 74.8% of the total filler volume was still present in the tissue.
So the product didn't dissolve, but when they looked at the actual physical shape of the filler, it had completely failed. It exhibited severe flattening.
Yeah, the heavy tissue pressure of the deep submucosa physically crushed the bolus over time. It lost all its vertical lift and just spread out laterally.
It's exactly like sliding a giant water balloon underneath a dense, heavy mattress. Over time, the sheer weight of that 205 kPa mattress is going to squash the balloon completely flat.
That's a perfect analogy. You completely lose the youthful contour you were trying to create. But the physical flattening isn't even the worst part.
Oh, right, the histological analysis. What was actually happening to the cells deep inside that tissue over a year and a half?
Down in that dense subcutaneous layer, the HA wasn't acting like a software update. It wasn't hitting CD44 receptors. It just acted as a passive scaffold.
And over time, the body replaced that HA scaffold. But it didn't build type 3 collagen. It built adipocytes, fat cells, along with fibrotic scar tissue and blood vessels.
We have to look at mechanotransduction here. Cells respond to physical stress just as much as chemical signals.
So the squashing was sending a signal.
Exactly. When you trap a gel under that high-pressure 205 kPa layer, the structural compression sends constant stress signals. The body thinks, we're under pressure, we need padding, so it initiates pathways that bring in fat cells to cushion the area.
I mean, think about it. If you're spending money on facial filler, the absolute last thing you want is for it to get squashed flat, miss all the regenerative receptors, and signal your body to build fat cells and scar tissue in your face.
It perfectly illustrates what happens when you prioritize biomechanics over biochemistry. Deep boluses flatten under pressure, and you entirely miss the cellular goldmine of the lamina propria.
So we are trapped. We can't put a heavy bolus in the deep tissue because it flattens and turns into fat. And we can't put it in the superficial lamina propria because it's a delicate jelly that will tear. So how do we find the Goldilocks zone?
The solution requires combining the precise anatomical depth with a highly specific physical delivery method.
Which brings us to the clinical facial aging study by Scarano and colleagues. They managed to solve this exact puzzle.
They did. They used the Ham formula, the perfect 20-monomer HA fragment fortified with amino acids, and they targeted the deep layer of the dermis, right at the border of the lamina propria.
But the delivery mechanism is the genius part. They completely abandoned the massive bolus, no water balloons.
Right. They used a mesotherapy technique, intradermal microinjections.
Microscopic amounts, like 0.2 to 0.3 milliliters per injection point. And instead of one massive session, they did these tiny microdoses every 15 days.
The spacing is crucial. Giving the tissue 15 days allows the fibroblasts time to actually process the software update, use the amino acids, and start synthesizing type 3 collagen before adding more fluid.
So they're placing the 20 monomer fragments exactly into the CD44 ports, but because the volume is so tiny, they aren't overwhelming that 115 kPa loose jelly tissue.
What they're essentially doing is hacking the tissue's natural architecture.
Using the stiffer 205 kPa layer underneath as a floor and resting these feather-light drops in the jelly layer just above it.
Exactly. The stiffer layer provides a structural backstop so the fluid doesn't sink and get crushed into fat, while the tiny volume prevents the jelly layer from warping.
And while the physics are perfectly balanced, the biochemistry goes to work. Those helicoidal spirals plug into the CD44 receptors, forcing the fibroblasts to build an entirely new matrix of youthful collagen.
And the clinical results reflect this beautifully. Within just the first month, they saw optimized pH levels, massive jumps in skin hydration, and a statistically significant reduction in wrinkles.
It's just a brilliant navigation of human anatomy. So to quickly recap this incredible journey for you listening, standard HA is just a wet blanket. True regeneration requires 20 monomer fragments to act as a cellular software update.
Right. You have to put those fragments into the lamina propria to hit the CD44 ports.
Exactly. And finally, microdosing those fragments just above the stiffer submucosa avoids the flattening and fat replacement caused by deep tissue compression. So the next time you read up on anti-aging or tissue repair, you now have a masterclass understanding of exactly why depth and molecular weight are the secret ingredients.
The mechanics are fascinating, for sure. But, biology always holds a few dark corners. Based on the fringes of the research we reviewed, there's a secondary implication here that requires some real critical thought.
Uh-oh. There is always a catch when we start hacking biology, isn't there?
There really is. So we've spent this whole time outlining how efficiently these HA fragments stimulate CD44 receptors to rebuild tissue. The clinical results are undeniable.
Right, it works.
It works. However, the wider literature clearly establishes that high CD44 expression is heavily implicated in tumor environments and cancer metastasis.
Wait, really? Because the receptor controls cellular growth?
Exactly. CD44 regulates cell migration, adhesion, and the release of powerful growth factors. In a healthy state, it repairs tissue. But in pathological states, prolonged interaction between HA and CD44 drives severe inflammation and tumor expansion.
Wow, so the exact same receptors we are targeting to build youthful collagen are the very receptors tumors hijack to build their blood supplies and spread.
Yes, it's the same pathway.
That is a remarkably fine line to walk.
It is, and it forces us to ask a difficult question about long-term aesthetic practices. If we actively, continually force these CD44 receptors open for cosmetic beauty, constantly delivering these potent software updates year after year, could chronic stimulation of that pathway accidentally awaken dormant cellular processes we absolutely do not want activated?
That really shifts the perspective. We want to believe cosmetic procedures are just structural engineering, putting building blocks in the right place. But the moment you interact with the lamina propria and intentionally alter cellular communication, you're playing with the fundamental codes of human biology.
And those codes govern a lot more than just wrinkles.
Definitely something to mull over the next time you see an ad for a miracle filler promising cellular regeneration. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.